Have you ever cared for someone so deeply that when they drifted away, or disappeared altogether, it felt like a piece of you went missing with them? The laughs, the shared memories, even parts of your own identity seem tied to their presence. And suddenly their absence becomes its own weight, heavy, confusing, almost unbearable. You catch yourself wondering, how do I release someone who still lives in my mind? How do I loosen this attachment without turning cold or resentful? This is where the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics cuts through the fog. They never urged us to bury our feelings, but to understand and guide them. Not to stop caring, but to stop clinging. In this video, we'll uncover 5 timeless Stoic principles to help you detach with strength and return to yourself with clarity. If even part of you longs to find peace, stay with me. What you hear may be exactly what you've been waiting for. Rule 1. Accept the impermanence of life. Have you ever tried to hold on so tightly to someone that the harder you clung, the more they slipped away? Maybe it was a friend you once spoke to every single day, or a partner you thought would be there forever. One moment they're part of your world, woven into your routine, even your identity, and then, without warning, they fade. No fight, no closure, just silence. And in that silence, suffering takes root. Not only because they're gone, but because we never prepared ourselves for the fact that they could leave. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." When we form attachments, we don't just connect to people, we create stories about them. We imagine permanence where there is none. We build meaning that may not be mutual. We convince ourselves the bond is fixed, solid, unshakable, but it never truly is. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that nothing in life is truly ours. Not people, not moments, not even our own youth. That's why the first step in emotional detachment is to embrace impermanence. And this wasn't pessimism, it was preparation. When you accept that change is inevitable, you stop clutching in fear. You start appreciating moments for what they are, not for how long you think they'll last. Remember the times Marcus wrote meditations, between wars with Germanic tribes and a plague that wiped out millions. As emperor from 161 to 180 CE, he saw empires rise and collapse, lives cut short, and even the strongest rulers humbled by fate. For him, impermanence wasn't a theory, it was survival. I experienced this myself with a friendship that lasted over a decade. We were inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, fears, nights spent talking until sunrise. But over time, the closeness faded. Texts slowed. Calls stopped. I found myself chasing what once was, sending messages, pushing meetups, trying to revive a connection that had already slipped away. Each attempt felt heavier, emptier, because in my mind, this friendship wasn't supposed to end. I was grieving not reality, but the story I had written in my head. Only when I accepted the truth that it had simply run its course did I feel free. There was no betrayal, no dramatic fallout, just life's natural rhythm. And in that clarity, I remembered Aurelius's words, "Accept everything which happens, even if it seems disagreeable, because it leads to the health of the universe." Letting go wasn't giving up, it was returning to the present, where peace actually lives. This idea isn't just Stoic. Across cultures, impermanence echoes. Buddhism calls it anicca, Roman life, filled with gladiators fighting to the death and emperors declaring themselves gods only to fall violently, offered constant reminders that power and life itself are fragile. Stoics like Aurelius responded with, "The universe is transformation. Life is opinion." This perspective gave them resilience. And today, in an age of ghosted messages, broken careers, and constant change, the same mindset can anchor us. Modern research even shows Stoic practice reduces anxiety by reframing change as natural, not catastrophic. Think of impermanence like the tide. No matter how much you resist, you cannot stop the waves. Fight them and you exhaust yourself. Learn to float and you find calm. The Stoics trained this mindset daily with premeditatio malorum, imagining loss before it arrived. Not to dwell in fear, but to soften its sting. They reminded themselves, this person may leave, this object may break, this season will pass. And by rehearsing impermanence, they grew calmer, steadier, more present. It's tempting to believe that if something truly mattered, it should last forever. But life doesn't follow that script. Friendships drift. Love changes. People grow apart. That's not a tragedy. It's a rhythm. And when you stop fighting the rhythm, you stop suffering from it. You can honor what was real without demanding it last forever. In Rome, this philosophy shaped not only private life but public resilience. Soldiers carried it into battle. Statesmen held onto it amid betrayal and exile. Aurelius himself observed, "Everything's destiny is to change, to be transformed, to perish, so that new things may be born. To resist change is to resist life itself. To embrace it is to stay centered no matter what happens. People will come and go. Circumstances will shift. But your peace, your ability to stay grounded in the flow of life, that's yours to protect. Because the one who learns to move with the river suffers far less than the one who tries to dam it." Now that you've seen the foundation of detachment, let's go deeper. Knowing life will change is only the beginning. The real challenge is mastering your inner world when emotions rise to drown out your reason. And that's where the next rule comes in. Rule 2. Master your emotions through rational thought. Have you ever sent a vulnerable message to someone you cared about? Something honest, something real, and then waited for a reply that never came? Minutes turn into hours, and suddenly your chest feels tight, your thoughts spiral out of control. Did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Have they decided to leave me? Before you know it, silence has turned into a storm created entirely in your own mind. But pause for a moment and ask, what actually happened? They didn't respond. That's all. Everything else, every anxious scenario, every painful thought, was built by your imagination. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoics taught that emotions are not raw facts. They are products of thought. Pain, fear, jealousy, grief, they feel automatic, but they don't come from events themselves. They come from the story we attach to those events. That's the hard truth and also the liberating one. Rule 2 is about mastering your emotions by mastering your thoughts. This doesn't mean you bury or suppress what you feel. It means you examine the judgment beneath the feeling. Epictetus put it clearly, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." In other words, life doesn't wound you, your interpretation does. Historically, Stoicism's emphasis on rational thought drew from Socrates, but in Rome, it became a shield against chaos. During the Antonine Plague, emotional discipline prevented panic from consuming the empire. In a culture obsessed with drama, gladiatorial bloodshed, and betrayal, the Stoics offered something radical: reason over impulse. Think about it. After a breakup, you might feel shattered. You replay every conversation, torture yourself with what-ifs, and wonder how the other person could move on so quickly. But if you strip it down to facts, the relationship ended. That's it. The suffering comes from the meaning you attach to that fact, and meaning can be rewritten. I learned this lesson through a friend. One evening, we shared a deeply personal conversation that left me feeling closer than ever. The next day, I sent a follow-up message, no reply. Hours passed, then a day. By nightfall, I was convinced I had ruined everything. Maybe I had overshared, maybe they no longer valued the friendship. My thoughts ran wild, and my emotions followed. But the next morning, they replied warmly. They'd simply been dealing with a family emergency. Nothing had changed. They weren't upset. They weren't pulling away. The only thing that had changed was the story I created in the silence. My pain came not from their delay, but from my interpretation of it. Modern psychology affirms this. Cognitive reframing, straight out of Stoicism, is now central to CBT, a therapy proven to reduce depression symptoms by nearly 30%. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." I had dyed a neutral situation with fear, insecurity, and doubt. When I could have waited calmly, I chose to suffer. And that's the choice we all face. Will you believe every thought your mind throws at you? Or will you pause and ask, Is this reality, or just my reaction? Mastering your emotions doesn't mean becoming cold or robotic. It means becoming sovereign. It means choosing thoughts that protect your peace rather than poison it. So next time anger rises, or anxiety takes hold, stop and ask, what are the facts here? And what story am I building on top of them? This practice isn't easy. It requires awareness, discipline, and patience, but it's the only way to stop being ruled by emotions rooted in illusion. And once you begin to think clearly, you'll also begin to feel clearly. That's where true detachment starts. Now that you've taken back control of your mind, the next step is learning how to build resilience, the kind of inner strength that keeps you steady even when loss is certain. Rule 3. Practice negative visualization for resilience. Have you ever caught yourself imagining the worst, and then immediately shutting the thought down? Maybe you pictured someone you love suddenly leaving, or your life changing in an instant, and you told yourself, don't think like that. Stay positive. We're taught to chase optimism and push away darker possibilities. But what if the Stoics believed the exact opposite? What if deliberately facing those fears calmly and with discipline was the very thing that made us strong? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, do not disturb yourself by imagining the whole of your life's troubles at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control. The Stoics weren't asking us to dwell on misery. They were teaching us to rehearse for it. They called this practice premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, or what we'd call today, negative visualization. First, it sounds strange. Why would anyone willingly picture losing the people or comforts they love? But the truth is, nothing we hold on to lasts forever. Our friendships, our daily routines, even our bodies. All of it is temporary. We can deny that, or we can prepare for it. And preparation doesn't numb the heart. It strengthens the spirit. In ancient Rome, where betrayal in the Senate or death in the arena was an everyday reality, Stoics like Seneca leaned on this exercise. Seneca, who endured exile and later a forced suicide under Nero, once wrote, he robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand. This wasn't pessimism. It was mental armor for a world where loss was guaranteed. I faced this lesson myself when one of my closest friends told me they might move across the world. We had been inseparable, daily calls, endless inside jokes, long conversations about life and meaning. Suddenly, there was the possibility that they'd be gone. My first instinct was denial. No, it won't happen. I'll find a way to stop it. But resisting the thought only made the fear heavier. Then I remembered the Stoics. I started practicing what they preached. Each morning I imagined life without them. Not as punishment, but as preparation. I pictured myself sitting alone at the coffee shop we always went to. I visualized coming home after a bad day with no familiar voice waiting on the phone. And then I pushed further, imagining new routines, new conversations, new growth without them. When the day finally came and they left, it still hurt, but it didn't break me. I had already lived through that goodbye 100 times in my mind. Because of that, I didn't collapse. I adapted. That's the gift of negative visualization. You don't do it to suffer twice. You do it to soften the shock, to remind yourself that you can endure what you fear. Loss isn't the end. It's a transition. Modern research even supports this. Studies show Stoic practices like premeditatio malorum can reduce emotional reactivity by up to 25%, helping people face uncertainty with composure. In Rome, where executions and political purges were constant, this exercise wasn't philosophy, it was survival. Now think about your own life. What would happen if you lost what you're clinging to most? Picture yourself after, what you'd rebuild, who you'd become, the strengths you'd uncover. Practice this enough and fear loosens its grip. You stop demanding permanence. You start trusting your resilience. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you care less. It means you see more clearly. You savor what you have while you have it, and you prepare your mind for the moment it changes. That's not morbid, that's wisdom. So the next time you feel yourself holding on too tightly, ask, what am I afraid to lose? And what would it look like if I lost it and still stood tall? Because the essence of Stoic resilience isn't about avoiding loss. It's about walking through the thought of it and realizing you are still whole. In today's world, where social media amplifies the fear of missing out or being left behind, this practice is more valuable than ever. The Romans didn't scroll Instagram, but they knew the pressure of fragile status, fleeting wealth, and shifting alliances. Negative visualization helped them remain steady in the face of uncertainty, and it can help you too. Because when you train your mind to say, "I am enough," even when this changes, you discover a resilience that nothing can take away. Rule 4. Focus on what you can control. Have you ever felt like you were giving everything, being thoughtful, present, generous, and still it wasn't enough? No matter how much effort you poured in, the other person drifted farther away, like a shadow you could never catch. That helpless feeling of doing your best and still losing can eat you alive. It leaves you asking, what more could I have done? How do I fix this? But here's a truth the Stoics understood. Suffering begins the moment we try to control what was never ours to command. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." That single insight carries a lifetime of freedom. Because if we're honest, most of our deepest pain, especially in relationships, comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. Their feelings, their choices, their love. We twist ourselves to fit what we think they want. We adjust, we perform, we give endlessly, all in the hope that they'll stay or love us back in the same way. But no matter how hard we try, we cannot govern someone else's heart. I once lived in that cycle myself. In a relationship, I constantly felt like I had to earn my place. I planned thoughtful dates, sent kind messages, anticipated every need. But the more I gave, the less I felt seen. They would withdraw and I would push harder. It became a loop, me pouring out more, them slipping further away. Eventually, I was exhausted. That's when I realized the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that I was trying to control how they felt about me. And that was never mine to control. This is what the Stoics meant. Your power lies only in your thoughts, your actions, your choices. Nothing beyond that. In ancient Rome, this principle wasn't just wisdom, it was survival. Senators like Seneca had to navigate a court where one wrong word could mean exile or death. They couldn't control Nero's rage, but they could control their integrity. Today, we face less dramatic stakes, but the principle is the same. We waste so much energy trying to manage others, coworkers, friends, partners, strangers online, when the truth is simple. You can't make someone care. You can't force someone to value you. But you can decide how you show up, whether you stay or whether you walk away with dignity. The moment I stopped trying to manage someone else's emotions and started managing my own expectations, everything shifted. I found peace not because they changed, but because I did. I let go of the illusion that effort could guarantee love. And in that release, I reclaimed my energy. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And what greater waste than trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed, or waiting for validation that may never arrive. When your happiness depends on another's attention, you've surrendered your peace. That's not love, it's captivity." Modern psychology confirms this. The idea of locus of control, choosing to focus on what's internal rather than external, has been shown to reduce stress and improve mental health by up to 40%. The Stoic slave-turned-teacher Epictetus embodied this truth. Though he could not control his chains, he could master his mind. And that mastery made him free. The same question applies to us. What is mine to own here? You can't force them to stay. You can't make them see your worth. But you can choose whether you keep pouring into someone who doesn't pour back. That choice is yours, and within that choice lies freedom. Emotional detachment, in this sense, isn't shutting people out. It's reclaiming your power. I used to live on a roller coaster. If someone was warm, I felt worthy. If they were distant, I felt rejected. But when I began applying Stoic principles, I stopped letting others dictate my value. I anchored my worth in who I chose to be, not in how others responded. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The pain you feel, the rejection, the longing, the unanswered questions, that is not your obstacle. It's your path. not to fix them, but to fix your focus. So if you find yourself asking, what can I do to make them come back? How do I make this work? You're asking the wrong questions. Instead, ask, what is mine to control? What is mine to release? Because when you finally let go of what was never yours, you rise. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Rule 5. Reflect on the bigger picture. Have you ever been so crushed by the end of a relationship that it felt like your whole world collapsed? As if nothing else mattered? As if your future had been erased? When you're lost in that emotional fog, the pain fills everything. Every hour drags. Every memory cuts. And the question keeps echoing, how do I move on from this? This is where the Stoic perspective becomes not just useful, but life-saving. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you have to assemble your life yourself, action by action, and be satisfied if each one achieves its goal as far as possible. In other words, zoom out. This heartbreak you're drowning in isn't your whole story. It's a chapter, not the book. When we're deeply attached, our vision shrinks. That one person becomes the center of everything, our happiness, our worth, our future. So when they leave or disappoint us, it feels like we lose ourselves too. But the truth is, you've always been more than that one person. You've always been more than that one season. Stoicism thrived in ancient Rome during chaos, civil wars, plagues, invasions. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations while leading armies against foreign tribes, all while enduring immense personal loss, including the deaths of children and betrayals by allies. He survived by widening his perspective, by seeing life as a vast tapestry, not a single torn thread. I remember a breakup that felt like the end of my world, not because they wronged me, but because I had wrapped too much of my identity around them. For weeks, I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't see beyond the pain. But one night, walking alone under a sky of stars, a question cracked through my fog. Will this matter in 5 years? Does this person really define my life's meaning? That single question shifted everything. I began to remember the parts of me that existed long before that relationship. The passions, the friendships, the purpose that had always been mine. Slowly, I rebuilt. And what saved me wasn't distraction, it was perspective. I realized the breakup wasn't an ending. It was a turning point in a far larger journey. That's the essence of Stoicism. To step back, to see life from a higher altitude. Every storm eventually clears. And when it does, you're still here, stronger, wiser, more grounded. Marcus reminded himself daily that even our grief and attachments are fleeting. Time is like a river, he wrote, made up of events, a violent stream. As soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away, and another comes in its place. Today, therapists echo this with journaling practices that help people reframe heartbreak as growth, reducing rumination, building resilience. In a world of digital breakups and fragile connections, this perspective is a lifeline. It frees us from tying self-worth to someone else's love and shifts it back to what truly matters, our own virtue and character. If you're hurting right now, I'm not telling you to deny it. I'm asking you to look wider. Step back. Think of your life 5 years from now, 10 years from now. How many storms have you already survived? And each time you didn't just endure, you grew. You became someone stronger, someone clearer. That's not an accident. That's growth. You've learned the hard truth. Not everything broken is meant to be fixed. Not everyone who leaves is meant to return. But here's the deeper realization: detachment is not the end. It's the threshold. Because once you stop chasing what no longer serves your peace, the question becomes, what are you moving toward? This is the sacred turning point. The moment where clarity turns into action. Where letting go becomes building. Where the energy you once wasted trying to save someone else finally returns to you. Now begins the real work, not of erasing the past, but of forging the future. Not of avoiding pain, but of rising through it. This is the deeper Stoic path, the one that doesn't just teach you how to stop clinging to the wrong people, but how to become the right person for yourself. Because Stoicism was never about suppression. It was always about transformation. Rule 1. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. Have you ever poured every ounce of yourself into holding a relationship together, only to realize you were the only one holding on at all? You tried to talk it out. You tried patience, forgiveness, understanding. You gave until you were empty, and still nothing changed. They kept slipping away, and you kept reaching, believing that if you just tried harder, loved louder, gave more, they would finally return. This is the trap so many fall into. Thinking that love means sacrifice without limits. That if someone is drifting, it's your job to anchor them. That if they're unhappy, it's your duty to fix it. But the Stoics saw it differently. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." That doesn't mean tolerating neglect or disrespect. It means guarding your integrity even when others abandon theirs. It means taking ownership of your own peace instead of drowning in someone else's chaos. You weren't born to be anyone's emotional firefighter. You weren't put here to silently bleed so that someone else can avoid their healing. The Stoic way isn't coldness, it's clarity. And clarity is knowing when compassion has turned into self-destruction. In ancient Rome, Stoicism gave leaders and citizens alike a compass in a world of shifting alliances and constant betrayals. Seneca, for instance, advised Nero while still clinging to his own moral center in a corrupt court. Culturally, Stoicism promoted resilience and self-reliance against the excess and dependency of Roman social life. I once heard a story about a woman who spent years with a man who refused to grow. He would vanish emotionally for days, then reappear with excuses. Each time she welcomed him back, hoping her love would be enough to change him. One night, after another silence, he told her, "I never asked you to care so much." That line shattered her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He never asked. She kept giving. She had mistaken her willingness to help for responsibility. She thought carrying his weight proved her worth. But in reality, it only buried her beneath problems that were never hers to solve. Seneca once wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." The pain you bear for someone else's neglect isn't noble. It's misplaced. You don't owe explanations to those who have already chosen not to understand. You don't have to lose yourself trying to hold together what another person refuses to protect. Detachment here is not the absence of love. It's the highest form of self-respect. It's being able to say, "I care for you, but I will not destroy myself to prove it." It's stepping out of the rescuer's role and reclaiming your energy as sacred. Too sacred to waste on saving someone who has no desire to save themselves. Today, this principle echoes in modern relationship coaching, where Stoic wisdom underlines the power of boundaries, preventing codependency, preserving dignity, and fostering healthier bonds. You must decide that your peace is worth more than their approval, that your dignity outweighs their confusion, that sometimes silence is the only answer they'll ever hear. The Stoics didn't teach us to be martyrs. They taught us to live with virtue, to show compassion without losing clarity, to build a life so rooted in purpose that you no longer chase what has already chosen to walk away. Rule 2. Build a life so full you don't chase what's gone. There's a certain silence that follows the end of a connection. The texts stop. The calls don't come. The routines that once gave rhythm to your days disappear overnight. And in that silence, it's tempting to mistake absence for emptiness. You tell yourself, "I feel this way because they're gone." But what if the truth cuts deeper? What if what you're really grieving isn't just the loss of a person, but the empty space where your own life should have been? The Stoics didn't obsess over people. They obsessed over principles, on building lives that stood steady no matter who stayed or left. Seneca wrote, "A great mind becomes a great fortune," meaning if you want to stop being rattled by what leaves, start creating what no one can strip away. Stoicism, which Rome adopted from Greece in the 2nd century BCE, placed self-reliance at the center of strength, especially in an empire where power shifted overnight and fortunes vanished with a coup. Emperors, generals, and senators embraced Stoicism to keep their integrity intact in a world fueled by betrayal and spectacle. It was a direct challenge to Rome's culture of excess, lavish banquets, brutal games, and endless power struggles, teaching instead that a life rooted in virtue, not validation, is the only life that endures. After heartbreak, most people scramble to fill the void, with distractions, rebound flings, new noise. But Stoicism suggests the opposite. Don't run from the empty space they left. Step into it. Let it become the ground where you finally grow. I once knew a man who lost the woman he thought he'd marry. She left without warning, no explanation, only silence. For weeks he was frozen, grieving not just her, but the identity he had built around being hers. Then something shifted. He stopped checking her social media. He stopped replaying old conversations. Instead, he wrote a list of everything he had abandoned for the relationship. Dreams he had shelved, hobbies he had let die, friendships he had neglected. And slowly he started again. He went back to the gym. He picked up painting. He spent weekends with people who lifted him instead of draining him. He stopped living on borrowed attention and started living from within. Months later, she reached out. But by then, he didn't need closure. He had built a life too full to chase what had already walked away. Modern psychology echoes this truth. Research shows that focusing on self-growth after heartbreak strengthens resilience, reducing distress and rebuilding identity through meaningful routines, skills, and passions. In today's culture, where social media amplifies inadequacy and rejection, living a life that is fulfilling on its own becomes a radical act of freedom. That's the kind of resilience Stoicism teaches. Not the shallow, I don't care anymore kind, but the deeper, I'm building something so solid, so alive, I don't have space to chase what's gone. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, very little is needed for a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. That's not just philosophy, it's a manual. Your body, your work, your learning, your routines, these aren't distractions from pain. They are the very architecture of freedom. In Rome, this mindset was survival. Seneca endured exile, lived under the shadow of Nero's tyranny, and still wrote with clarity because his foundation wasn't external. It was internal. Letting go is never just about removing someone. It's about filling the silence they left with what you've been neglecting. When your world stops orbiting around one person, it expands. You start to see beauty again. You develop skills. You move forward. Don't crowd the silence with longing. Fill it with purpose, with creation, with motion. And little by little, their absence stops feeling like a loss. It starts to feel like the beginning of your return to yourself. Rule 3. Turn rejection into reinvention. There's a moment after rejection when it feels as if the world just stops. You hear the silence. You read the words. You notice the coldness in their tone. And something inside you caves in, not only the plans you made with them, but the story you were writing about them, the future you imagined, the identity you built around being chosen by them. Rejection cuts deeper than most of us admit. Not simply because of what we lose, but because of what it forces us to face in ourselves. Yet the Stoics saw rejection differently. To them, rejection wasn't a punishment. It was revelation. Seneca said, "It is when we are cast out that we find better ground." Sometimes being pushed away isn't the world turning against you. Sometimes it's life clearing unstable foundations so you can rebuild on something real. Most people respond to rejection by collapsing inward. They obsess. They self-blame. They replay the moment endlessly, asking what they could have said or done differently. But the wiser question isn't why didn't they choose me? The wiser question is, why was I waiting to be chosen at all? Studies in Stoic-based therapies show that reframing rejection as a chance for self-examination strengthens resilience, reducing rumination and fueling growth after heartbreak or professional setbacks. In ancient Rome, Epictetus, who endured slavery and disability, transformed personal adversity into timeless philosophy, proving that reinvention begins within, not with outside approval. In a culture where political fortunes shifted overnight and reputations could crumble with a whisper, Stoicism taught people to treat rejection as a trigger for virtue, not a verdict of failure. I once knew a man who spent years preparing for his dream job. He made it to the final round, nailed the interview, and believed the offer was his. Then came the email, "We've decided to go in another direction." He was devastated. For weeks, he spiraled, not because of the job itself, but because his identity was entangled with one outcome. It wasn't just a career door closing. It was the collapse of a version of himself built entirely on someone else's approval. But eventually he shifted. Instead of staying trapped in that void, he turned inward. He asked, "What am I really after? Who do I want to become with or without this title?" He revisited forgotten passions, studied, created, rebuilt. A year later, he launched his own company in the same industry. Ironically, the very firm that rejected him later asked to collaborate. But by then, he no longer needed their validation because he had already validated himself. That's the pivot. Rejection isn't a locked door. It's a mirror. It reveals where you've been giving your power away. It reflects back insecurities you've been hiding, attachments you've been clinging to. And if you're willing to look at that mirror without flinching, it becomes a chisel. You don't just stare at yourself, you reshape yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Rejection is not an obstacle to fear. It is raw material for reinvention. It is the starting point of a self that no longer begs for belonging, but builds its own ground. That doesn't mean you won't feel the sting, you will. But the Stoic doesn't deny emotion. He studies it. He asks, "What is this teaching me about my ego, my illusions, my expectations?" And then he lets the lesson burn away everything that isn't true. Modern resilience training echoes the Stoic wisdom, showing how post-rejection pain, when reframed, can spark self-improvement and lead to deeper life satisfaction. You are not here to be someone's option. You are not here to wait in the hallway of approval. You are here to build a foundation so steady, so alive, that rejection becomes irrelevant. Not because you're numb, but because you've remembered your worth. So the next time you hear no, let it ring not as proof of failure, but as a signal of freedom. Not as a reminder of lack, but of potential. Because what walked away was never the whole of you. And that truth that you are already whole is where your reinvention begins. Rule 4. Detach without going numb. There's a stage in healing where silence masquerades as strength. You convince yourself you're improving because you've stopped reaching out. The tears have dried. The questions have ended. Their name no longer pierces you the way it once did. But beneath the surface, you don't feel much of anything at all. That's not healing, it's hardening. That's not strength. It's numbness. And numbness is not stoicism. It's quiet survival. And you deserve more than mere survival. Stoicism never asked us to become emotionally frozen. It doesn't glorify indifference. What it calls us toward is something harder and nobler, emotional wisdom. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it." Left unchecked, that judgment can swing to extremes, either obsessive attachment or complete emotional shutdown. The Stoic chooses a middle way. Not the escape from emotion, but the mastery of it. Not to be ruled, not to be numb, but to live beside feelings with clarity. To detach without becoming numb is the practice of warm separation. It means you can care deeply, yet not lose yourself in keeping someone. You can give freely not to be needed, but because giving aligns with your values. It's a strength that doesn't need armor or noise. In ancient Rome, this balance was vital. Marcus Aurelius himself faced devastating losses, including children. Yet his writings reveal empathy, not bitterness, even while leading an empire in decay. Seneca, exiled and later entangled in Nero's court, urged readers to feel grief, but not let it consume them. In a society where loyalty was fragile and power fleeting, Stoicism championed inner steadiness over outward numbness, teaching people how to grieve without surrendering their humanity. I once heard of a man named Elias who adored his wife of 7 years. From the outside, their marriage looked solid. Inside, intimacy had withered. Her words became sharp, her presence distant, her heart elsewhere. He clung on, not from ignorance, but from fear of leaving something he had poured so much into. One night, he stumbled across her journal, unintentionally. On its pages were confessions. How trapped she felt, how passionless the bond had become, how she longed for something more alive. His first response was devastation. His second was detachment, but the cold kind. For months, he moved through life on autopilot. No arguments, no tears, no fights, just silence. Friends said he was handling it well, but in truth, he wasn't handling anything. He had buried his emotions so deeply that nothing could surface. He wasn't stoic. He was afraid to feel. It wasn't until a friend asked him, "When did you stop showing up for yourself?" that he cracked open. For the first time, he admitted what he had been hiding. That he missed her, that he was angry, that he felt invisible. And in naming those feelings, in facing them, he began to heal. He didn't explode. He didn't collapse. He spoke with calm. "I love you, but I won't erase myself to keep this alive." And with that, he let go, not with ice, but with honesty. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. This is what it means to detach without going numb. You don't shut your heart down. You redirect it toward yourself. You don't reject love. You refine it. You don't flee from intimacy. You become wiser about who deserves access to it. Seneca once wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." The trial isn't in feeling nothing. It's in feeling fully without being consumed. It's walking away with compassion instead of collapse. It's letting go without locking yourself away from love forever. In Rome, public displays of raw grief were often judged as weakness, especially in politics and the military. Stoicism offered an alternative, a detachment that held space for feeling, but refused enslavement to it. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom. Research on emotional regulation shows that acknowledging feelings, not suppressing them, leads to stronger mental health, preventing burnout and fostering what's now called wise compassion. To detach in the Stoic sense is to live with both an open heart and a spine of tempered steel. You don't let pain calcify you. You let it clarify you. You don't become less human. You become emotionally sovereign. Society often mistakes numbness for strength, coldness for maturity, withdrawal for wisdom. But Stoicism teaches something far more radical. True power is staying present, staying soft, and staying principled, even in loss. So if you're learning detachment right now, ask yourself, are you building walls, or are you building boundaries? Are you shutting down, or are you sitting with discomfort until clarity appears? Are you retreating out of fear, or stepping back with intention? Because the point is not to feel less. The point is to feel fully and still choose your response. That is warm detachment. That is emotional maturity. That is Stoic strength. Rule 5: You are always whole. There comes a point in healing when the fog begins to thin. The silence no longer feels suffocating. The endless questions lose their grip. You stop replaying the same conversations or drowning in what-ifs and if-onlys. And in that stillness, something surprising happens. You start to feel your own weight again. Not as a burden, but as presence, as fullness, as center. And for the first time in a long time, you realize you were never broken. You had only drifted away from yourself. When someone leaves, it can feel as if they've carried something essential with them. A piece of your heart, your sense of home, your anchor of meaning. But that's an illusion, because nothing essential can ever be taken. Not your values, not your growth, not your soul. What they walked away with wasn't your worth, only the role they once held in a chapter of your story. And like every chapter, it had to close. The Stoics were masters of this perspective. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And what greater outside event exists than the arrival or departure of another person? If you measure your value by who comes and who stays, you'll always be chasing. You'll never stand still long enough to become who you truly are. You were not defined by who stayed. You are not diminished by who walked away. And you don't need to be completed by someone who may never return. You were whole before them. You are whole now. You simply forgot that wholeness can feel quiet when you've been used to emotional noise. Stoicism's focus on self-sufficiency emerged in a world where freedom was fragile, where emperors ruled by decree, where slaves like Epictetus had little control over their circumstances. Yet Epictetus taught that true freedom lies within, an idea that later influenced Christian theology and modern self-help. I remember a story of a young man who fell deeply in love during a season when he felt most uncertain about himself. She became the center of his universe. They dreamed together holidays, homes, children's names. Through her, life made sense. And when it ended, his world collapsed. He didn't know how to live without her because he had slowly written himself out of his own story. For months he couldn't sleep. He sent long unanswered texts. He clung to old conversations like sacred texts. Nothing brought her back. And eventually, not through strength but exhaustion, he stopped reaching. In that silence, something shifted. He picked up his guitar again. He reconnected with friends. He began writing not about her but about himself. His voice returned. His spine straightened. He remembered how it felt to exist without orbiting someone else. One evening, sitting alone with a cup of coffee, no explanations needed, he realized, I'm okay. Not because the pain vanished, but because the pain had finally done its work. It had carved space for him to come home to himself. That's the Stoic gift of perspective. Time doesn't erase meaning, but it reveals it. What once felt like an ending becomes a turning point. What once consumed you becomes something you outgrow. What once defined you becomes a footnote in the story you're still writing. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Heartbreak is adversity. Detachment is proof of growth. It's not forgetting. It's remembering who you were before you bent yourself to fit inside someone else's love. In ancient Rome, where marriages were often strategic and divorces common among elites, Stoics like Musonius Rufus taught that real wholeness could never come from status or partners but from within, an idea that echoed centuries later in Renaissance humanism. And today, in a world flooded with loneliness despite constant digital connection, Stoic practices remind us that completeness isn't found in another person, but in cultivating our inner life. Yes, they mattered. Yes, they shaped you, but they weren't the whole book. You will love again, but this time not from emptiness, but from fullness. Not to be rescued, but to share. Not to search for meaning, but to bring it. And when that happens, it won't feel like losing yourself. It will feel like meeting someone who recognizes the wholeness you already are. This is not the ending. This is the remembering. The realization that what you searched for in someone else has always been carried within you. All you needed was to pause long enough to hear your own voice again. So pause, and ask yourself with honesty, who holds more power here, my emotions or me? This is where freedom begins. Not by cutting people off, not by pretending you don't care, but by choosing clarity over chaos, peace over proving, stillness over struggle. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. If your thoughts are painted in fear and longing, you'll drown in them. But if you train them toward virtue, strength, and steadiness, your soul becomes unshakable." Detachment is not apathy. It is sacred discernment. It is walking away, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally remembered your worth. It is letting silence speak louder than arguments. It is realizing that being ignored isn't always rejection. Sometimes, it's redirection. You don't owe anyone your collapse. You don't need to break just to prove you cared, because you were always whole.